Hey everybody. So in this video, we're going to implement our branching project. So at this point, you should have reviewed all the other Wwise videos at this point. So you have a good understanding of how interactive music structures work within Wwise. That being said, we're going to start with a fresh new project and build the structures for our branching project. So the first thing that we need to do is open our Wwise launcher and then open the version of Wwise that we're using for this semester, which for right now is 2022-148202, but in your class, it's probably different. I'll launch this and then I'll create a brand new project. So I'll hit the new button. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the desktop. Make sure to put it someplace where you're going to be able to find it later on. Okay, let's name this what the assignment requires. So that's the first name, and then underscore last name, and then Wwise with 2 W's, and branching is what we'll name the project. So this should be your own, it shouldn't be my name, it should be your own name. And if you remember, uppercase and lowercase matter in games, so follow all lowercase for this. We are going to add in the Mac platform. And we don't need either one of these sets of assets for us. So we'll hit OK. It's going to build that. It's going to put that Wwise project folder on our desktop. And then it's going to ask us about license. Again, if you're using the free version, you can have up to 200 media assets in your project, which is way more than we need for this. Okay. Next thing that we want to do is go to our layouts menu and then make sure we're in the designer layout. If your screen does not look like mine, you can reset the layouts menu by going to reset factory layouts, select everything, and then reset layouts. And that will say, oh, are you sure you want to do this? And you'll say yes. So I'm working on a 1080 screen right now, so I'll want to kind of move things around as we go. Your screen should be more or less set up for editing and working within Wwise, but don't be afraid to kind of move things around as you need to. All right, so let's look at our branching files that we've created. So we should have 3 different states, which we do here. We have a chase state, an explore state, and a combat state. We have an introduction and an ending, and then we have 3 stingers. So what we're going to do first is we're going to set up the game syncs. Remember, the game syncs are one of the ways that Unity communicates with Wwise. So we have an overall game state, which we're going to create. So I'll call this, I'll right click on default work unit, states. I'm going to create a state group, and I'm going to call this game state. Now this could be locations, it could be whatever your game represents or your music represents for each one of those states. So I have 3. I'm going to go ahead and add 3 states. The first one is explore. The second one, right click, new state. The second one is chase. And then the third one for my game is combat. So I've created that, and now we'll set in the game, we would have it pass over, oh, we're in chase state or we're in explore state. So we have those set up, and then I have 3 stingers that I need to create, and I'm going to do that by creating 3 triggers here. So the first trigger I'm going to create is for my first stinger. And if I look back at my stingers, I have encounter, find item, and open treasure. So what I'll do is call this new trigger that I've created encounter. In fact, I'm going to put stinger encounter, maybe STG encounter. And then I have another one for find item. And then my third one is open treasure. So I'll go ahead and create another trigger, stinger, open treasure. All right, so you should use whatever names of your stingers that you have in your game. So they probably won't be the same as these. You probably want something else. Okay, now we have the basic structure set up in the Game Syncs tab. We're going to move back to the Audio tab, and we're going to start importing all of our files. You can do this in one big swoop if you want. You can go in and select everything, and then drag it to the interactive music hierarchy inside the default work unit. And what it's going to do is build music structures. Essentially what it's going to do is take the wave and put it on a track. So if I look at Chase here, it's added the wave file onto a track and put that track in a segment. You can tell whether something's a track if it just has one little wave on it here, or if it has two, that means that's a segment. So I have all my files created as tracks and segments, and I'm just gonna close all of them. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to start matching up and each one of these states into a playlist. Remember, segments don't loop on their own, so we'll want to create playlists that actually loop these files. So in Chase, what I'll do is select all of the Chase segments, right-click, new parent, new playlist container, music playlist container. So all the Chase goes into a playlist called Chase. And we'll do that for the other ones too, but remember that playlists require two setup items. So the first one is actually putting in the hierarchy, which we just did, but you can see that the playlist is still empty because we have to decide how we want to play these back. So I'm going to drag in Chase 1, Chase 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then I'm going to loop the entire thing. So it's going to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then repeat the whole section again. Now, you can test it right here if you want by hitting the transport control play. And you probably should. I'm going to kind of do the other ones and play it all at the end. So I'm going to take combat, same thing, two-step process. I select them first, then I right-click new playlist container. And I'm going to call this playlist combat. Two-step process, that was the first step. The second step is to tell them what phrases I need, what order I need to play these back in. So I'm going to go ahead and add all my phrases in. Good idea to save every once in a while. And I'm going to build the Explore playlist, which has another 6 phrases in it. New parent, so I select them all, new parent, then I'm building a music playlist container, and this will be playlist Explore. So I have them all set up, almost. I forgot to do step 2, which is to drag all these in. So I have to drag them one at a time. I can't drag them all at the same time. So put all of the explorers in, so they play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in order like that, and then repeat at the end. I may have not set this to loop, so I'm going to go back to combat, and I look at it and I'm like, oh, oops, I forgot to loop that one. So just kind of reviewing each one of these. Chase is set up correctly with a loop. Combat is set up correctly with a loop. And then Explore also set up with a loop. All right. Next, what we want to do is we want to create a switch container which switches between our playlists here. I'm going to select all my objects here, and I'm going to put them all in a switch. So right-click, new parent, and then I'm going to select a music switch container, which is going to go, so I'm going to call this music game switch. And again, this is kind of a two-step process too. I've organized them, but now I have to decide how I'm going to play them back. I'm going to choose in this little arrow here a state group to control the game switch. So I'm going to set that up as game state, and then I can see the game syncs that I set up before are now controlling this game switch here. I'm going to assign the chase playlist to chase, combat to combat, and explore to explore. All right, so I should be able to play this now. And what I'm going to do is select the game music switch again. I'm going to look at my transport control. I'm going to make sure that I can see there are different things that I can look at. If I look at game state here, I can switch between each one of these states. All right, so let's go ahead and listen to this and see how it sounds. So when I hit play, I'm going to start off in Explore. And this is working, which is good. It played the first phrase and then the second phrase. And then I'm going to go to chase. And at the end of this phrase, it should go to my chase state and start playing down those 6 phrases. So that's the first phrase, second phrase. I'm going to go to the combat section now. So at the end of this phrase, it will switch. So that's working pretty well. And then I'm going to go to none. And then at the end of this phrase, it's just going to stop. So I have things pretty much set up. I have to do the intro and the end next, and then these 3 stingers here. Okay, so in the game switch here, I'm going to have to kind of open this up here to see my general settings. Sometimes if you're 1080 like me, you probably won't see it, so you'll have to drag it down. So I see some general settings, and if I go over to the transition tab, this is where I want to be, and I want to set up 2 special transitions. The current transition just waits until the exit cue, which means the end of the phrase, before moving on. But I want to create 2 special ones, one for the introduction and one for the ending. So I choose the Add Transition button over here. When I go from, I'm going to browse, when I go from nothing into chase, then I want something special to happen. And I did it a little wrong here because I can select nothing here. So nothing to any other state, we are going to use our introduction. So I'll select the introduction for our transition, the intro here. So whenever I'm starting from nothing and going to any other state, I'm going to play this intro. Same with going from any to nothing, right? When we're playing something, then we want to add another special transition, which any music playlist that we have going to nothing, we want to use the transition segment ending. And then we've kind of set everything up except for the stingers and reverb tails, which we'll get into in a minute. So I can test this. I can have my game state set to none, and I can start playing it. And then I go into Explore, and I should hear my introduction. Nice. And then it's going to go into my Explore playlist. And then I'm going to flip to chase quickly. First phrase of chase. Then I'm going to go to combat. So I'll wait till this next phrase. This is second phrase in chase. Then combat. End of this phrase, it's going to flip. Cool. Now we need to end it. So that's phrase 1 of combat. This is phrase 2 of combat. When I select none, at the end of this phrase, it's going to play my ending. So most of that is set up correctly. Now let's talk about reverb tails for a second, because I haven't set any of them yet. I'm going to go back to Explore, and I want the tempo for this. It's going to be easier for me to kind of set up my reverb tails if I set the tempo. So under Playlist Explorer, I'm going to override the parent object, which is this game music switch, and I'm going to put my tempo in here. This, I actually don't know what the tempo is of this, so I'm just going to leave it at one. We're going to assume it's 120 for now, but you should put in your actual tempo. Look at your DAW for each one of the different states that you have, and they could be at different time signatures and tempos. So we override and we put it in here. Then let's go ahead and set the reverb tail. So on each segment, we can use the red marker to define where our reverb tail starts. So here's where my reverb tail begins. Then I go in the second one. I'll do that here. Here's where it begins. And so I'm setting up where the reverb tail starts based on and I'm basically snapping to bars and beats to make it really easy for me to kind of see where my reverb tails are. If you have pickup notes, then you use the green marker to set where the pickup notes, where the downbeat begins. So you move that by holding down the control key and saying, all right, well, this is where my downbeat begins. I have a pickup note in bar 1, and then I have this reverb tail at the end. See the video entitled Advanced Looping Options, which should have been the last video in that tutorial series. Okay, so all of these are set up. I just need to now set up these stingers. And how do they work? So we go up to the gain switch up here, and then choose stingers. So across the top there are all these tabs. Again, make sure to open so you can see everything. Stingers, and then we're going to add 3 of them. So we'll add the first one. We'll just kind of add 3 right away. Then what we'll do is we'll choose which trigger. So the encounter stinger trigger will play what? So we have to choose. Right now it's not playing anything, but we'll choose to play the encounter stinger. Similarly, when we do find item, what do we want to play? We want to play the find item. And lastly, our last trigger that we set up in the Game Syncs tab, we're going to go over and select the open treasure. Okay, so I have each one of these stingers up here. And if you use the transport control, you can actually go to the triggers. So the last option here is the triggers, and we can play those while our music switch is running. These triggers will not play during a transition, like an intro and an end. So I'm going to start this, and I'm going to start it using nothing. So I'm going to play nothing first, and then I'm going to go into Explore. It's going to play my intro. Remember, if I play a stinger here, it's not going to work. I'm going to select the display triggers. Once it's playing the main piece, once it's in here, now I can play my triggers. And I'm just kind of playing them, and then when I go into my second state, like my chase state, they will also play. So end of the phrase, and then I can play them here. So something that you may have noticed is that my stingers aren't quite loud enough to play over the top of them. I'm not going to introduce how to do ducking yet, but I will talk a little bit about how to adjust volumes. You can go into any playlist segment or playlist that we have and go to the general settings and then change the overall volume for that playlist. Similarly, you can go to the stinger and say, all right, well, that stinger wasn't loud enough. Let me bring it up by 6 so that you can better mix your piece. Now, there should be meters over on the right-hand side. Try not to go to clipping because you will clip at some point if you just keep raising up volume. Sometimes it's better to kind of lower the playlist so it's better to hear the stingers. And depending on what your overall volumes are and things like that. So pay attention to this. You may be better off lowering these by 6, for instance. Okay, so that covers pretty much everything, except I didn't specifically say how the intro and end. Remember that intro and end also have reverb tail markers. So if you want your first piece to start after the intro a little earlier and it has a reverb tail on it, then you want to move this to where it should start as well. And that pretty much covers all the different things to get your branching project up and running. Let me know if you have any questions.